Khalid Binouri is a seasoned professional with 44 years of experience in public service, aviation, education, and policy analysis. He's a specialist in senior level management, research, and writing with expertise in arms control, diplomacy, and South Asia country. Binouri has received several awards, including the Sitara Imtiaz for policy analysis. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be an interesting session, I reckon. Thank you for waiting and thank you for coming in. What we are going to talk about is harmony across borders, quest for peace and security amongst neighbors. But the subject itself is not as simple. Harmony, perhaps a peaceful sense of living, is a metaphor for good neighborly relations. But there are new realities that one has to factor in. What does neighbors really mean? Does this really mean only physical neighbors or the sense of globalization? And does it mean influencing states? And how does that work? What kind of harmony exists? Do we even have it? Do we desire it? Do we want to go in that direction? Then also areas of how the obvious relations, that physical relations that exist in South Asia, Pakistan and India, Iran, China for that matter, how does that come in? What is the factor of stability or instability within states that affects the borders, and how does that gel with other aspects of relationships? And finally, also the aspects of technology, where standoff weapons affect securities, where physical borders may not be crossed. What about the cyber domain, where you could be sitting hundreds and thousands of miles away and still be influencers? So all of these areas and others are perhaps part of this idea of how do you have or create harmony across borders, and how difficult or relevant is the quest for peace as well as security. How does that gel? I'm also struck by this reference from the previous session that we just finished about the debate about geoeconomics and geopolitics. How does that figure into this balance, if at all there's a balance? So there are several ideas. And what the good news is that we have three very, very eminent panelists here who all three of them do not actually need any introductions, but I guess they do merit one. Let me mention them in the order that the guests are sitting. Victoria Schofield is an avid writer. She has several books to her credit on, and she's a Kashmir expert and also South Asia expert. The Fragrance of Tears, even the title of her last book on Kashmir is an indicator of how difficult or arduous this quest could be. I could go on with the introduction, Victoria, but let me just flag this. Zahid Hussain, who has also a long list of publications, is a prize-winning journalist. He's also written extensively on Afghanistan, which is not only a physical neighbor, but also an area that one has to absolutely factor in when you're thinking of harmony across borders. And there have been questions earlier also on this. And then finally, Ikram Sehgal Saab, who even his group of companies is called Pathfinders, the signal that he gives on what he wants to do with life, in addition to being a very successful businessman. But perhaps more relevant to this discussion would be his experience of having been a prisoner of war and having been successful in getting away from there and physically going across borders, and perhaps that will also be a relevant thing to think about. Now, I want to start by asking all panelists to initially take a few minutes, just about 3-4 minutes each, to give their own understanding or sensibility about the topic in general, and then we go through perhaps one or two areas that I would want to ask specific questions to each one of them, and thereafter we will, whatever time is left, we will have some questions. So perhaps we could begin with you, Victoria Schofield. Floor is yours, madam.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear from the back? I hope so. Well, once again, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be on a panel with such eminent fellow panelists, including those I've known for many years, and we've shared panels before. I think the topic is really, it is absolutely crucial and fundamental for Pakistan, and tragically, it is actually a topic which has been under debate for the past 76 years, because Pakistan has never actually had harmony on its borders. And one has to, actually, if one wants to understand why, go back into history to chart the history of the relationship of the various countries. Because what is also evident, especially when we look at the map, is how pivotal Pakistan's position is geographically. And this is one of the problems that you face with how can a country progress and have harmony with borders when there is antagonism on its borders, when actually it could be a crossroads, it could be a channel, and it is indeed a channel between Central Asia, South Asia, and also indeed northwards towards China. I think what I want to just say in my opening remarks is to pick up on the point you've just made. Do we actually want harmony between borders, or do we prefer to have a state of sort of intolerance with our neighbors because it actually helps us foster a particular agenda and a particular narrative? And I'm sure we'll come more onto this, but as you know, most of my research has been either with Pakistan, India, or indeed with Pakistan, Afghanistan. And you've got two different aspects of whether these relationships can be harmonious, and they actually feed off each other. And for a long time, as we know, Pakistan was looking towards Afghanistan. We used to use the term strategic depth, precisely because it did not have harmony on its border with India. And one begs the question, does the relationship that Pakistan had with Afghanistan be determined by the relationship it's had with India? Does Pakistan actually want to have a harmonious relationship with India? And this is where you get into the diplomatic, political narrative. Do you say one thing? Do you say one thing to other countries and then actually work towards another thing which you believe perceive benefits your own narrative better, your own strategic interest? One would say that it's absolute common sense that Pakistan should have a harmonious relationship with India, but does it actually fit into the narrative which Pakistan has conceived for itself, that India is, quotes, the enemy? I talked about this before in terms of which is the enemy. How do we grow up out of the narrative of partition, the trauma of partition? Did it help Pakistan create a national agenda by having India as the enemy? Otherwise, if it had been the friend, people might have said, well, what was partition about? Why did we go through so much suffering only to have India as our friend? So I think there's this double narrative that's actually going on that we need to explore if we're going to really talk about harmony between borders. Because as a person of the 21st century, you would say, well, obviously we need harmony between borders. We want our children to grow up in peace. We don't want wars. We want to be able to trade. We want to be able to prosper. And you're only going to get that with harmony within borders and beyond borders. So that's the obvious. But is there a more subtle sub-narrative which is going on? And I think actually the history of Pakistan shows that there has been this sub-narrative as well. So I'll just leave it there for the time being.
Thank you. Thank you for this. And perhaps a reflection, a quick reflection would be, takes two to tango. Both sides have to actually factor into actually wanting to interact, and perhaps we will have more discussions on that. Zahid Hussain Saab, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much. one can understand the volatility of this region, that if one could describe it an arc of crisis. It is the region which houses almost 1/3 of the world's population when we include Pakistan, China, and India, and the 3 nuclear-armed countries. So one can understand how volatile the region is. And given the situation, this area is also a center of all kind of conflict. Pakistan has gone to war with India for 3 times and have been verge of getting into yet another war, or at least I would say on 4 occasions. So that shows how the serious situation is. And both the countries are nuclear-armed nations. And it's also a very unique situation because when we talk about Russia, America, and China, they're all nuclear countries and rivals, but they are far away from each other. But here, we have 2 nuclear-armed countries, which basically, even in a warning time, is less than half a minute, or less than much more. So that shows how the situation is. Pakistan has been the front line in at least last 40 years. In a various wars we have witnessed across the border in Afghanistan, 2 major wars have been fought across the border in Afghanistan. And both wars involved superpowers. One was, we all know about what happened in 1980s, and that area had become the center of a rivalry between United States and Soviet, at that time, which was called Soviet Union. And the consequence, we all know about it. Then we saw another war involving United States, superpower. The role of United States during 1980s was completely different from what we saw after 9/11. So Pakistan was in a unique situation. In 1980s, we were supposed to be the bulwark against Soviet bloc and support Mujahideens. But there was a role reversal after we entered into yet another aligned United States after 9/11. Pakistan was supposed to undo what has already been done over the years. So that was so not only we have been in conflict with India, and since the creation of the 2 countries as independent states, but our western borders have been under fire for a very long time. Over the years, over the last 2 years, we have seen another tectonic change in the region. With the end of 20 years war, American war in in Afghanistan, that is basically what happened. When the United States went into Afghanistan, I don't think it knew anything about what is going to happen there. And after 20 years of war, we have seen the situation coming to full circle. Taliban are back into power. There has been some thinking here among the policymakers that with the return of Taliban, maybe Pakistan will be more secure on its western border, but it has not happened. Now we have a very volatile eastern border, as always. Their situation is no war, no peace at this point of time. But what we are witnessing on our western border is getting much more serious. The spillover effect of the Taliban rule in Afghanistan is very much evident now. And Pakistan has a security challenge from much more of a serious nature on our western border. So how to deal with the situation is a huge challenge for the state of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you for your initial remarks. What you're telling me is it's complicated and it's much more than, and that's the beginning. So that's how we go in that. Sahil Saab, any initial remarks?
I think I'll start off with our membership with the World Economic Forum. And actually, if you look at a crucible, there you find exactly where the relationship of Pakistan and India, because you had all the businessmen from the big businessmen of India there, almost 100 of them, and we had about 5 Pakistani businessmen. And the relationship we could gauge from there. And I think the worst period was the Kargil War. The Kargil War, I think, we came to this thing. But the Kargil War led to the Thorn relationship. And I don't know whether you were there at Agra or not. Do you remember Agra? Agra Summit. So I was there I was there at Agra. And I think all of us sat in Agra itself, in front of cameras, waiting for the signature, which this thing, and we had this lady who was the information minister come and tell us it's not going to happen because Mr. Advani is flying in, right? And actually, some of us saw the agreement and the pencil, the corrections done to it, et cetera, and we were 100% sure this would lead to opening up because this was a BJP government, right? And this was literally a military government from this side. So we thought that if the big antagonists can come to some understanding, it makes a great difference. After Agra then did not happen, because Agra did not happen, of course, the consequences. But I think I saw the change. People who have been with me to Davos know that I give this Pakistan breakfast for heads of state and heads of government from 2003 onwards. And we'll, inshallah, have our 20th one next year in January. Now, all the Indian top businesses used to come to the Pakistan breakfast, all of them. And all of them became very good friends. And of course, there was no comparison between their wealth and my standing. But the point is they became very good friends. And I give to you that when actually my son got married here in Islamabad, a lot of them flew in to attend my son's wedding, right? And in fact, some of them came in the private aircraft. Now, then the BJP government came in, the present government, Mr. Modi. Things started changing. One, not a single Indian now comes to my breakfast. There are 100 of them used to come. Right. Second, I used to go and lecture also, other than NDU, I used to go and lecture in the National Defense College in Bangladesh every year. After some time, the Bangladesh government stopped my going and lecturing there. I still went because I was the director of Bank Al-Falah, and I was given this responsibility of Bangladesh to open up branches there, to open up things. I still went, and ultimately, even that stopped. More branches were stopped from being opened because Bank Al-Falah, even though technically the majority shareholder is the Sheikh Nayan, they said it's a Pakistani bank. Very rightly, it is a Pakistani bank. So that stopped. And now, I don't get a visa to go to Bangladesh. And it's not because of the Bangladeshis. Right? So you have the problem is of the mindset in India at the moment. And you see that mindset, which is that, you know, the other day, a friend of mine went to the first match between India and Pakistan. He flew in from this thing. I have a video, he gave me a video. He said there were only 30 Pakistanis in the whole stadium comprising 135,000 people. And out of that, 23 were members of the Pakistan team, or the coaches, etc. So the 5-6 Pakistanis only holding Pakistan flags, right? So basically, it is the mindset of the present Indian rulers which is spoiling that. You know, and of course, it's very easy to say, like Victoria said, that you know you have a thing. Do you want an antagonistic because you need to have defense? This thing. It's not that. I think we very well understand that the necessity of having cross-border trade, right? There are so many things in India that we can buy, purchase at half the cost what it costs us for import. There's so many things in Pakistan that can go to India, right? Even the complementary economies of Pakistan, Bangladesh, that were being, exchanging jute and jute goods and tea for cotton and rice from here. Even that is almost come to a dead stop, right? All the textiles that used to go for the Bangladesh government factory still goes, not in the amount that it goes. Let's say it is very, yeah, maybe right. We had a security thing, and I did say that yesterday at one of the panels that there were two big morons in Pakistan. The first moron thought about the defense of the East lies in the West. Therefore, they put 90% of the, 95% of the armed forces in West Pakistan, 5% in this thing, and we see what happened in 1971. And the other moron thought about that Afghanistan gives us strategic depth. Afghanistan just gives us strategic headaches, nothing else, right? And I think it is total nonsense to ever have believed them, right? We saw that from time to time, manifestation of that in many ways. When we went for conferences, East-West Institute, I went to United Nations, et cetera, the Afghans who had studied here, some of them had been, that thing has gone up in schools and colleges here. They were the most anti-Pakistan, that thing, etc. They took away, like the panel before Homa Bakai said, they took away the slots of our children in schools and colleges. And they went and now they go, the most anti-Pakistan elements in the thing, etc. So I think we have to take, at the end of the day, we have to take reality for what it is. The reality is what? 30 flights a day used to go between East and West Pakistan.
Yes.
Even at the height of it, even when, today, by the way, just to give you an idea, do you know why don't they allow flags into the cricket stadium in Bangladesh? Because the Bangladesh population turns up with Pakistani flags. So they don't allow flags into the stadium. It is banned, any flag.
So what you're saying is the complicated has become even more complicated.
Because of the mindset of the present
evolved.
Indian rulers.
Yeah.
They're not going to allow us anything.
Yes.
And we have to look at our space from that point of view.
Yeah, can I on this point come back to you, Victoria, and ask you if you want to look at peace and harmony across borders, what is the European experience? What usefulness or otherwise can you see which can become applicable to this region?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think it is good sometimes to make comparisons. Obviously, the history of the regions are very different, but if one looks at the sort of lowest common denominator, there are comparisons. And I would say, just in terms of Mr. Segal's comments about the Indian mindset, I think the mindsets have never been fully adjusted. You came very close at Agra, but there was still a drawback. And what you need is actually to look at Europe and see if you can learn from Europe. We have to go back to the Second World War and post-Second World War period. You couldn't have had more opposing mindsets than the French and the Germans during that period. But before very long, much less time than that's taken place between India and Pakistan, you had a situation where there's virtually no difficulty in traveling actually anywhere in Europe. And I think, talking about weddings and what the civil society really wants is that they do want to be able to cross effortlessly. They don't want to go through loads of red tape to try and get a visa. And we should look at visas if we're talking about harmony between borders, because you need to be able to go effortlessly without a great deal of expense, not just so that the rich can cross because they can get visas. And what you find now in Europe is that you just drive through, you virtually waive your passport. I mean, obviously, there's a Schengen situation, and in terms of the UK, we've now done something very drastic, which is to withdraw from the European Union. But still, we waive our passports. We don't have any difficulty. We don't need visas. And what you want to get to with, as I say, it's a vision, and I think we need to hold on to visions that at some point, between India and Pakistan, which includes obviously going into Bangladesh, that you can go there effortlessly without the suspicion, and this is where it's very difficult. I know it's incredibly difficult for Pakistanis to go to India normally, and likewise for Indians to come to Pakistan. I myself, with my husband, very keen cricket fan, was watching the Pakistan-India match. And my husband was saying, you know, it's ridiculous. Look at the poor Pakistanis. There's hardly anybody supporting Pakistan. And no wonder the atmosphere was so hostile, because it was full of the Indians, you know, obviously egging on the Indian team. You want people, what actually, again, it's getting back to civil society. What does civil society want? But my point remains that I think there's a narrative which is pursued, which says one thing, but actually works towards another, because this mindset hasn't been opened up on all sides, in all respects, that we really want to get to be a greater sort of region where we can cross effortlessly, including into Afghanistan. And I agree, Afghanistan has become a strategic headache now for Pakistan. But initially, there was very much, as I say, a turning towards developing relationships with Afghanistan, because the relationship with India was so hostile. And of course, we haven't mentioned and brought in the China factor, but the China factor is very important, and you're in a very precarious situation at the moment where Pakistan has good relationships with China, but China does not have a good relationship with India. And in order to get this harmony, you also need for China to have a good relationship with India. So there isn't this perpetual suspicion. It comes down to a lack of trust. And of course, Zahid mentioned Kargil. Kargil destroyed a great deal of trust that had been built up in the 1997 Lahore Declaration. So I think it's getting, where do we get the trust from that will enable all sides to pull back from these hostile attitudes that actually we're better off being hostile and keeping our borders manned. And part of that challenge is opening up the borders for trade, for visitors, for people to visit their holy shrines, which again, I mean, if we want to talk about Kashmir, is a big issue. You know, you want people to be able to cross over that LOC to visit their families.
Thank you for this. You know, this the situation was never easy anyway. But what I see here in this through this discussion is there are no hopes from the current Indian administration in the sense of even wanting to come to the table. So that's one area which is quite obvious. But what you're saying is that the issue of even if you are able to get to the table to discuss facts, you know, there's this notion about you come to the table when you want to solve issues, when you're going to talk about the talk itself, which I guess you refer to by saying having one narrative and meaning another, is which complicates the situation more. So India and Pakistan is a significantly challenging situation for harmony. What about Afghanistan? Zahid, can I come to you and ask you to give us some thoughts more on the commentary of the complexity of the Afghan situation and this possibility of peace across?
Well, I think after the end of war in Afghanistan, or American war in Afghanistan, the whole geopolitics of the region has changed tremendously. And so Taliban are back in power. It was already foretold after Doha Agreement when Americans signed with the Taliban. And it was actually seen as a document of surrender, because when you sign a document with the party, which means you have accepted that it is going to be the future government or administration. So what has happened in Afghanistan, yes, actually it was quite shocking for everyone, the way Taliban took over so swiftly. But if the people have followed whatever was happening over the last 20 years, it should not have come as a surprise. The American presence or American occupation of Afghanistan, they did try to build what they call democratic institutions. But it cannot happen this way when an occupied country, whatever system you try to implant, it cannot work. The conflict and contradiction of Afghanistan society came up very sharply over the period. I will narrate a story during the peak of Taliban war against Afghanistan way back in 2009, and then when the insurgency had started picking up. I met a very senior Taliban commander on the border area near Chaman. I asked him that what has happened, because initially it seemed that, and President Bush at that point, in 2004 had declared that the war was won in Afghanistan, and they were supposed to build up a democratic institution. So, but certainly 2005 onwards, the resistance started. I asked him what happened. He said, gave me 4 points that initially, when Taliban government was toppled, people, Taliban had already started weakening at that point during their rule. So he said, there was no resistance. And people thought a kind of change in Afghanistan, and there was awe of American military might. And there's hope, and then suddenly quite a lot of Afghans who were living abroad, they started coming. And he said, nobody would give us even refuge. Then I said, I asked, what happened then after 4 years? He said 5 things. Number one, the expectation of Afghan people did not meet. They started actually. Then the awe of American military might gone. The third thing is that each bombing, which killed civilians, had created this kind of resentment among the people. And then that was the time when they started giving us refuge. And that was how the insurgency started picking up. So what I said actually that it was happening, and when Taliban took over, well, initially it seemed, and also I will just give why Pakistan. Pakistan's dilemma was that on the one side, Pakistan had become a close ally and non-NATO ally of United States, and are supposed to help America fight its battle in Afghanistan. As far as the alliance goes against Al-Qaeda, it worked very well. But Pakistan's huge dilemma was what to do with Afghan resistance. And very clearly, Pakistan's policy in Afghanistan has always been India-centric. There's no doubt about that. Everything actually about Afghanistan for the last 20 years, Pakistan policymakers saw it from Indian. I'm not saying that it was wrong or right, but certainly it has dictated Pakistan's policy. And that is throughout, and that also was one of the reasons for some kind of tacit support for the Taliban insurgency. So it was a huge contradiction in terms of what they used the term about Pakistan's relations with the United States as a free enemy. So that was the background. Now, the things have changed tremendously, and Taliban are back, but initially it was seen that 2002 will be different from the first one. It has not happened. There was some difference from the approach, but the same. Now, there was apprehension throughout among the Pakistani security agencies after 2007 also, because it was not a situation in Pakistan as it was in the 1990s when Taliban ruled Afghanistan. Pakistan had gone through have fought a huge insurgency in former tribal area. And TTP, which is Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, may be a Pakistani-specific agenda, but it was a extension of Afghan Taliban. And it ought to happen that when the Taliban would take over power, that it will give a kind of encouragement to TTP, which almost 4,000 to 5,000 their fighters had shifted to Afghanistan after the military operation. So whatever we are witnessing, Pakistan is fighting yet another war against the insurgency. And it has become very, very serious now. What happened at Miawali air base yesterday, and there's continuous. About this year alone, I'm not exactly the figure, but number of Pakistani soldiers killed in this war is much greater than it was actually earlier. So it shows the seriousness of the situation which is developing. The two things, I will just finish on the one. Well, actually, Pakistan's, we are discussing Pakistan, we should examine Pakistan's policy more critically. We cannot say that we did not do anything wrong, everything is happening across the border, which somebody else's fault. No, it is our fault also, hugely. And I think probably one thing about the Pakistan policymaker, and I think it was that we have been cashing on our geostrategic position for a very long time. Our entire foreign policy or national security policy had been driven by not our interests, but the national security interests of other superpower, particularly the United States. And exactly same thing. So now, after the end of war in Afghanistan, we are at a juncture where actually we have to decide how to formulate our policy. And I think probably we should stop thinking about yet another, opportunity comes into the way, where we will start getting that aid or support from United States or the country. I think that is exactly time we should start seeing through regional prism and regional dimension. And I think probably we have been talking about it, but unless the region is peaceful, we cannot develop. And the real one thing, I think very important, that economically weak country, we are dependent on other countries. We cannot actually, for every crisis, we have to look toward some other country for help. So to think about an independent foreign policy is actually mishonorable. And I think probably this is a time where we have to examine our foreign policy, our priorities, what our national priorities are. It lies in the region.
Thank you for these reflections. There's another session on foreign policy. Perhaps this will flow into those directions later. But let me flip this to another angle. And Sehgal Saab, can I ask you to talk to us about your experience of having physically moved across borders? I'm thinking of your book, Escape from Oblivion, and why you called it Oblivion when you made a successful escape from while being a prisoner of war post 1971.
First of all, I became a prisoner of war due to my own mistake. My father raised the 2nd Battalion of the East Bengal Regiment in 1949. So I grew up, I was 3 years old at that time, I grew up in that battalion. And my father commanded that battalion 57 to 58. And I was, then when I was commissioned in 65 into the same battalion. So I virtually grew up in that 2nd East Bengal. And a lot of people would not know that it is 2nd East Bengal that literally ruled Bangladesh from 1977 to 1990. One of my father's adjutants was Major Ziaur Rahman, who became president of Bangladesh. Another of his adjutants was Major Rashad, who became president of Bangladesh. Another of his adjutants was General Shafiullah, Major Shafiullah, who became Chief of Army Staff. Incidentally, I was the adjutant of General Ziaur Rahman and also General Rashad when I was there. So we had a very close association, and when I was posted in East Pakistan, I was the pilot of the Commander Eastern Command, and I was sent on back to West Pakistan. I was on temporary duty. I was sent back. I was reposted back on 21st March, and I reached Dhaka on 27th March, and I was immediately told to go back to Pakistan, because very naturally I would have divided at least my emotional loyalties, because my father was from Sialkot, my mother was from Bogra, East Pakistan. So I was sent back. So obviously when the news of the revolt came and I was on joining time, I did not believe it. I could not imagine that a unit of the Pakistan Army would revolt. It was beyond my imagination. So I was on joining time, I decided I'd go. And lo and behold, there was a revolt. and some officers had been killed, right? The only reason I was not killed was that the men decided that nobody would touch me. Anyway, in short order, I was handed over to the Indians, and I stayed in Agartala jail. Then, along with 32 other prisoners of war, officers, we were transferred to a place called Panagarh, undeclared. This is an undeclared prisoner of war camp. We had 1,000 other ranks and 32 other prisoners of war. And there were some Bengali officers also with us who were not trusted, but they were cleared one by one and let all. And eventually, on the 100th day, I escaped, and through various places, Calcutta, Delhi, and all, long story. I've written a book about it. But then, with help, I crossed over into Nepal, Kathmandu, bought a passport under a different name. By this time, people knew. Then I went to Burma, went to Thailand. And incidentally, I came back to East Pakistan before the war started. So I was the first prisoner of war to escape from India. And then I was posted on 12th of November to West Pakistan, where I was, then I joined 44 Punjab, became 4 Sindh, and I was there for some time. And obviously, in 1974, by this time, there was a lot of feeling about, the feeling that my mother was Bengali and that I couldn't go to staff college and I stood first. So there was no way of staying in the army, so I was literally thrown out of the army at that time. I just want to say that to you that, my only sister was married there, and she died in 77. She was younger to me. She died in 77, and she was married to a cousin of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Umar Hayat Khan. He was son of Abdul Salam Khan. She died in 77, and it was the first time I had to take my parents there. And I never wanted to go back to Bangladesh, ever. But I went there, and obviously this was my battalion, my unit, ruling Bangladesh at that time. And the way, there was a thing. So I gradually assimilated back, and I, came back into that thing. And I've seen the development of Bangladesh, 1990 and this and that. The thing is very simple. You cannot have inveterate foes, and you cannot have inveterate enemies. You've got to, and this is something that I'm not saying this is George Washington gave this to when he was leaving as president. He told the US Congress, they do not make inveterate foes and do not make inveterate enemies. I want to cross over to 2005 and the earthquake. When General Musharraf, the earthquake, and I think General Shakil will be here, who was commanding a division there at that time and doing this thing, earthquake. At that time, the ceasefire line had ceased to exist, because all the bunkers had been destroyed. And soldiers from both sides came across to dig people out. There was no ceasefire line for some time. And people were giving food, etc., across that ceasefire line for some time. And then General Musharraf sent me, he said, we need to have certain things which you're not getting. So I went to the Confederate of Indian Industries. And I spent 3 days with them. I got Narayan Murthy, the Infosys, he wrote out a check for 20 crores, and they sent 1,000 trucks. And Chaudhry Shujat and Pervez Alai received them at Baga border, right, with goods and all that. So what I'm saying is that, there was goodwill between people existed.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that goodwill today, because of the absolute, the propaganda, that anti-Pakistan propaganda fed into them so much.
So let me, I'm sensitive to the time also, but let me come to the obvious question, Victoria. Kashmir, peace, harmony, but also the sense of security. And while this subject needs the whole day's discussion, can I request you also to be brief, because we just have, 10 minutes before we go in other areas. So how do you see the problem of Kashmir, the complexity of it, and are there solutions?
Well, that is a very big question which we need a lot of time for. But it is the most fundamental question, and actually I think from that question stems the entire peace and harmony argument that we need to address. And I often say it's sort of like tectonic plates coming together. And listening to Mr. Sehgal talking again about Agra, when there was so close but yet so far because the signatures were never achieved. And this has been the story also of Pakistan and India relations. It will only happen when both leaders and have a consensus also, because what you don't want is for the leaders to then be cut adrift by the opposition and not have what's been agreed accepted. You need a consensus for both governments to say enough is enough. We want, it's in both our greater interests to have peace and harmony for the betterment of our people. And I often place a lot of faith on civil society, because when you talk to Indians and when you talk to Pakistanis at a civil society level, unless they're whipped up by negative propaganda, negative media, they do want to get along. They do want to travel and visit. And I've traveled in India, and because I've been very easily to Pakistan, people say, oh, you know, we're longing to go to Pakistan. They want to go and see the Bajpai Mosque. They want to go back and forward. And without resolving this terribly thorny issue, I mean, we used the word complicated at the beginning, and I think Zahid's point about the economic independence, because then Pakistan is not dependent upon the narrative of another country like the United States. They have independence, they can conduct their own foreign policy, another complicated subject which we also need to go into. But until and unless, and I've spent decades working on the Kashmir issue, you manage to resolve this issue, it would be like a breath of fresh air that you could suddenly start moving. And I do believe, I've talked about the twin narratives, I do actually believe that Indians and Pakistanis at this stage, no one's going to undo partition. Partition is there, they're two independent countries. That you could look to a future where you live in both with sovereignty, but you do travel back and forward. The fact that there's one border crossing at Wagah, when you think, as I say, you look at the map of Europe with the roads crisscrossing back and forward, you can cross all over the place. And I mean, this is one border we're getting, you know, within no time, we'll blink, it'll be a century. We all, well, I certainly won't be there then, but others will still be there, these young ones. 100 years, you know, we had a 100 years war. You don't want to have 100 years potential war or hostility between the two countries. So Kashmir now, you asked me that very difficult question, how can we resolve it? The only way to resolve it is through a dialogue, but you've got to have the will, you've got to have the trust, you've got to have the will, you've got to have the decision, the vision between the leaderships that having the hostility between our two countries over this issue doesn't help us. And the really challenging aspect now is that you cannot have a resolution without consulting those people who live in the area. And I say this with great conviction, because otherwise it will again not be acceptable. And so that's the challenge, and people should be staying up late at night thinking, how can we resolve this issue? How can we embody? You're not going to probably please absolutely everybody, but how can you get a fair solution, resolution of the issue that will be acceptable to the inhabitants, and then break this deadlock, which is now a deadlock. You know, it's become almost something that's batted about between Islamabad and New Delhi. But while it's being batted about, people on the ground suffer. And I think this is where, you know, the humanitarian aspect of a political relationship or of a narrative has to be always borne in mind. We talked about one statistic given, I think it was yesterday or the day before, since 1995, no child in Pakistan anyone born after 1995 has had conflict. Anyone born after 1989 in Kashmir, in the Kashmir Valley, has grown up with conflict. And in a world where we have so much to live for, so much to be enjoying, this is a very poor way to enjoy life when your future generations grow up in conflict. And I say this again with passion because when you don't resolve issues, you hand it on to the next generation. And that I really think we should take a step back and think, do we want to hang the baggage of the unresolved Jammu Kashmir issue onto yet another generation? We should really say it's through dialogue, and we should really have our thinking caps on at all levels as to how we can resolve it.
Yeah, thank you. The stakes just went higher than as we knew. My stakes are also time management. So Zahid, can I ask you to maybe take a minute and a half and tell us, so can the peace across borders can it happen? Can this be done in the case of Afghanistan, handling the issue of migration or remigrations, but also sustainability of it? Is it possible? Please take a minute and a half.
I think the major problem with Pakistan's policy, particularly towards Afghanistan, that's never been a kind of well thought or well discussed policy. For over the last 40 or 50 years, we had policy of opening our borders. Millions of Afghans came here. Maybe actually one could argue at that point that the situation in Afghanistan was such. Over the years, even Taliban, when during American war in Afghanistan, we allowed them to come in. Now suddenly what is our policy is, I can't understand any logic of what is happening now. You know, you have certainly given an order, an ultimatum that such as by November 1, all Afghan illegal should leave the country. What does it mean? You allowed your this a porous border, which has been open for so long, and I think probably that was also a wrong policy. No country can have insecure border. We never cared about it because it suited our so-called security policy at that point. Now what we are doing is the worst. It will create more tension in the region. It's not going to solve anything. When you see that hundreds and thousands of Afghans lining up, young children, women, and some of them who had never seen Afghanistan, suddenly actually had forced to leave the country, that never happened. And I think probably it is going to have a huge cost for Pakistan. And whatever you say, look actually, who makes the policy in Pakistan? The major question is, who makes policy in Pakistan on foreign policy or national security policy? Does it represent the people's, or is it formulated by the representatives of the people? No. This is a caretaker government, and has taken such a decision which has a long-term consequence for Pakistan's national security and foreign policy.
So
I think
Zahid, non-elected caretaker government. Non-elected.
Non-elected caretaker government does not have any mandate. So the real issue is Pakistan. Who makes our foreign policy and national security policy? And there the problem lies. Because it does not have anything to do with the representative of the country. And the result is that we have been making mistakes upon mistakes. At one point, we think that Afghanistan can provide strategic depth to us. Who has done that policy?
Yeah.
Now we feel that all Afghans should be, as far as the terrorism is concerned, that's been an excuse which is being made for that policy. Is basically your counter-terrorism policy has failed. You don't have a clear policy direction. You have no strategy to fight terrorism and extremism in this country. So don't make excuse of Afghans and to throw them out.
So what I hear from you is, after the applause, what I hear from you is, we are correcting a wrong, but you do not.
Making yet another mistake.
Yeah, but you of course do not agree with that mannerism. Saigal Sahab, any last thoughts? Not
Yes,
more than a minute, please.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, let me say this, that I think uh, the way it was handled is wrong. I think they had to go back. But I think it could have been on a phase-wise approach with, first of all, start making holding camps just to give psychology to them that, okay, if you don't go back, this is what's going to happen to you, et cetera, et cetera. But I think they had to go back. There's no question about it. I mean, you cannot just keep on feeding them forever here and this thing. One thing, I just want to add one thing. I think the problem was of reality. People thought that Afghan Taliban are different from the TTP. Excuse me, 30% of the Afghan Taliban went from madrasas in Pakistan. They went there, they used to fight there, come back to TTP, this was rotation. Once Afghanistan became independent or whatever, you think the TTP people who were from here would not come back? And they would not demand, if they say that, okay, we've managed it in Afghanistan, why can't we do it in Pakistan? This is something, beyond my imagination even, that somebody would think that this would not happen. I think I agree that the way it's been done is wrong, but it has to be done. There's no question about it. Yeah.
All right, so we come to a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure that people are brimming with questions. I'm afraid I only have time for 2 questions, very short ones, and I will similarly have the same. So let me take this lady here and this gentleman here.
No,
Loudly, please.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Assalamu alaikum. This is Serish Mustafa from Karachi Council on Foreign Relations. First of all, I want to tell you, sir, that we all know that who makes these policies. We are just afraid or we are just shy to mention them. And secondly, I just want to ask Ms. Victoria and you that what are the solutions? How can we reach peace? For me, it is through economic opportunities, through a common enemy, that is poverty for this South Asian region. So we can talk about the commonalities here instead of the disparities and instead of the enmities. So if we can start from talking about economic opportunities for both the poor people in India, in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, so that we can reach somewhere. And secondly, what has stopped Pakistan to work in trade with Central Asian republics? Right? We have trade potential opportunities of about $50 billion in there. But we have
So
just
trade opportunities is the broader
in the
question.
in the
Yeah, thank you.
region, in the
Thank
region,
you.
within region.
Thank you. I'm going to lump the other question along with that so that we can you can respond together.
Thank you, sir. Sehgal Saab, you said that, if I heard you correctly, that it is the fault of the current Indian leadership. Their mindset is problematic. But, sir, we had this complaint for the last 75 years. Even when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, we had the same complaint. One of our major newspapers said that India is a fanatical Hindu state in 2009, when a Sikh was the Prime Minister of the country. So, is that not the time our economy demands that we become a little self-critical and look at the mistakes, irreparable mistakes that we made? For example, Air Marshal Asghar Khan, who was a respectable military officer, he said that all the wars were started by us. Why don't we be a little honest?
Okay, so these are issues which need. All right, I'll take this one too. Please be very short, sir.
My name is Athar Abbas. My question is about Vajpayee's bus diplomacy. In the panel's view, was that a sincere effort in quest for peace, or it was a trap? And why it got derailed? Who was responsible? Who undermined that process? Thank you.
And आप किसको एड्रेस कर रहे हैं? Anyone in particular out of the panel? किसी को भी? All right. Okay, we have 3 questions. We have literally 30 seconds, so please be as brief as you can be. Let's go in this order. Maybe a sentence and 2 each would do. Thank you. Let's start with Victoria.
Well, I'll be very brief. I mean, I'll address the lady there about economic opportunities and poverty, alleviating poverty for all. It is absolutely, obviously, the ideal, but you've got to have the governments doing it and enacting it and allowing it to happen. And that is the biggest dilemma. Obviously, it's the ideal, and it's the best way forward is to alleviate poverty across the board and find the commonalities. But you won't get anywhere unless both governments trust each other to do so. And the example was made of what was going on with the earthquake. You would have thought, we all thought, this is now an opportunity. There's such devastation. And as we say, the LOC was virtually obliterated, but it didn't happen. Cargill was the answer to that question.
I think like Pakistan, India, we've seen that at one point we were on the verge of war, that was Kargil. And then actually we suddenly saw completely shift in the environment when General Musharraf and Prime Minister Vajpayee at that point started a new process. And it continued under Manmohan Singh. And that was a period, actually, the whole situation had completely changed. And that I'm not saying that we were very close to solution of Kashmir, but certainly there was a breakthrough, possible. And 4 Point provided some kind of solution at that particular point. And I think probably that was the best thing could have happened between Pakistan and India. But because of the circumstances, it is spoiled. But we also actually, it will be a very controversial thing to say, but what happened in Mumbai in 2008 has actually prevented any peace lobby, and that basically has stalled every process now. So, well, history will tell us actually what really happened.
You have the last.
I just want to actually answer you. Yes, a lot of rhetoric went on in Pakistan and Bangladesh against each other. But the practical reality of things started, if you remember, there was a South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which had a lot of cooperation going on till such time Modi's government came. After that, it stopped. That was the practical thing, that you can abuse each other, you can shout insults at each other, but there was, association with each other of some sort. After Modi's government came in, that stopped. And that is the line from where things went south completely.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to join me in thanking this panel and raising some questions, several questions, and also endeavoring bravely to answer some. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you so much.
Da 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 da